So hi, I'm Greg Monroe. I work for SolarWinds as a senior Drupal developer. I've been doing Drupal since Drupal 6 in a variety of roles. So welcome to Asheville Camp, Asheville Drupal Camp Asheville, if I can get that out there right. In here. Extra credit for anybody who can kind of recognize the background of my slide here.
Detection.
Yeah, that's a old topographical map of Asheville. So I was trying to locate whether or not we were on the map, but I think
that map. Oh yeah.
There's an E missing though.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, it's an old one. This is like circa 1900 or something like that. So anyway.
There it is.
Yeah. So anyway, we're here to talk about security, the final frontier. And this is kind of a semi-case study based on my experiences. Basically, this year started off with kind of the middle of December, we started getting a denial of service attack on our server that went on continuously until the middle of January. I'll talk about kind of how I dealt with that. We've had the two Drupal-Geddon patches come out. Also had a couple of self-denial of service stuff that's happened to me. And the big one was, the company I work for is very international, and GDPR was very big. So we had to go through a whole big GDPR audit, which implied a lot of security changes to our site and stuff like that. So I decided to kind of take all that together and give people a quick overview of security, pretty much from the top level stack all the way down to Drupal. I said I'm trying to walk the line. Some of the stuff depends on your situation. If you have a GoDaddy site, there's a lot of this stuff you can't do. Versus if you manage your own server, or in our case, we use Acquia and CloudFlare, and Acquia gives us enough stuff that we can do a lot of stuff on the server in there. But if you don't manage your server stack, it should also give you some questions to ask your service supplier as to what they're doing to mitigate these things. And so, bottom line is, I think everybody should come away with something they can use, whether you're a site builder or a DevOps. So, that said, let's get into it. So, why should you care? I came up with this little target at the center thing, and I think the couple of points I want to highlight is hired hackers. It used to be that if you pissed off a hacker, the hacker would come after your site. So you had to worry about an individual hacker or a hacking group. There's a lot of people out there now who will put out their services. For instance, that denial of service attack I was talking about. We're pretty sure it was we have no proof of this, but we're pretty sure it was probably an ex-employee who paid somebody who owned the zombie network to spam our site. And you can do that for $50 in Bitcoin. So, the threat against sites has grown because of this. It's not just somebody trying to deface your site. That's the other part, is the professional hackers. They're not trying to deface your site the way they used to. They want to come in and put something between your forms that you're collecting user information that grabs that information quietly so they can get as much information as they've got. I've been told that if you have a valid email address with some personal information associated with it, you can get $1 an email address. And if you talk about SolarWinds, we have 7 million email addresses in our marketing database. So that's a very tempting target for somebody. The other part is people talk about, oh, well, I have to spend all this money up front to secure my site. I have to pay somebody to keep it updated. I have to, deal with that. Well, when the two parts are there, it's going to cost you more money to fix a security breach, to pay for what remedial things you have to do when you lose security, than it is to pay for that kind of stuff up front. So it's cheaper to do prevention. It's the old announce that prevention is worth a pound of cure type thing. The other thing that people don't think about is if you do it right, you'll actually get a performance increase from your site. Because as I show, when you start doing layered stuff, you won't have to hit your Drupal resources as much. So you don't necessarily have to pay for a bigger server in there. And the rest of the stuff are just things that people should already know, like privacy laws, GDPR, PCI DSS, all sorts of different FERPA. There's all sorts of privacy laws that you may have to deal with in there. And of course, the thing like revenue loss, brand damage, losing your data in there. So security is definitely worth looking at. So some common threat vectors, and I'll kind of go through each of these in a little more detail with some help and some pointers in there. Is server attacks. That's basically people for denial of service, people that are trying to hit you at the top level there. Code attacks, things like people finding bugs in your code, Drupal getting bugs, things you have to worry about are non-Drupal bugs into your web server, bugs in PHP in there. User attacks, that's basically people trying to get ways to log into your system. Either phishing to get an email or get a user ID password, social engineering, brute force. And the other one that's I'm going to touch briefly on, but it's hard to really deal with, is the internal attacks. With GDPR, they have a whole bunch of things that they set up to make sure that people can't grab that data, that 7 million user IDs or email IDs, and ship it off without having another person sign off on it, that sort of thing. So, that's really more situational. If you're a single person site or something like, you may not be able to do some of this stuff because you just have to trust yourself. Okay, so going into server attacks here, this is kind of the key points I want you to take away from this is, first line of defense is tripwires and problem ID tools. I'll talk about those later. Or defense, layered in defenses. Use things like a CDN, varnish, use your htaccess rules to keep people away from the actual server. And then, there's lots of Drupal modules that you can also use. Secure HTTP headers. A lot of the new browsers have, there's a whole set of about 4 or 5 HTTP headers that are designed to deal with XSS, cross-site scripting in there. So there's actually a module for Drupal that will help with that in there. But basically the golden rule here is to set it up so that if somebody's trying to hack you, somebody's trying to do a denial of service, they don't get to the Drupal server unless they're doing something, they're having to get through your layered defenses there. So expanding on those, tripwires and problem ID. The things that I use are uptime monitoring. I'm fortunate because Pingdom's owned by SolarWinds, but there are other services out there, and usually my first notice that something's going wrong is when either response time goes down and I get alert, or Pingdom starts failing because the server's being hit so much that it can't respond in there. So it lets you know something's going on, at least as far as denial of service type stuff. The other thing that's good, I've got a couple of scripts which are custom, so I couldn't really share them, but you can find things out there on disk monitoring in there. So if your logs are growing, basically if you figure out, oh, my logs grow at a certain rate, you can put something in there that monitors how fast your logs are growing. And if your logs are growing really fast, then, okay, maybe you should look at that in there. Better to have something that's kind of automatic than maybe going in every day and trying to check the logs and things like that. CPU monitoring is another way, because if people are getting past your defenses and making Drupal do more work, that will let you know. Scan through your 404 or 403 arrows. You'll get, the 403s are people that know there's a Drupal site and are trying to log in or actually access stuff. You'll notice in the 404 errors, there'll be a lot of nuisance URLs. There's a lot of people that go through and scan for easy open parts. So you'll see a lot of people looking for the WordPress login. Or some of them are more nuisances, but they aren't bad. Is Microsoft Exchange has this auto-discovery.xml file. And the Exchange, anytime email goes out from like your domain and somebody reads that, it'll go back and ask for that file on your Drupal server. And you have to realize any 404 is resources, because if you don't block those before you get to the Drupal site, Drupal is having to go through and process that using code, CPU cycles. So your 404 logs can tell you, gee, here are some things I might need to deal with. It's good to have some good log analysis tools. My favorite is GoAccess, goaccess.io. You basically can set that, if you have access to the logs on the server, you can pretty much just set up and do GoAccess, and it will give you a nice little command line graphic that shows you, top host hitting, top URLs hitting, a whole bunch of information that's very useful there. Now, if you combine that with, just the general using grep and pipes, if you have command line access, or you can download your logs, understanding how to grep through the logs can help you find all sorts of interesting things. For instance, with GoAccess, Apache tends to do a lot of local host calls. It basically is the way it keeps track of all its little separate daemons. So your log, like if you GoAccess, one of the top hosts calling stuff will be localhost. So basically you can use grep to strip out all the local host names, strip out all of your personal IP or your office IP in there, and then get the logs down, quickly get the logs down to what you care about, external access there. And finally, a website that I have been making a lot of use of that's really nice is the abuseip.com. So once you've kind of gone through the logs and decided, oh, we've got a denial service, or there is a single site that is constantly hitting our server for some reason, you can take a single IP and poke it into there, and it will come up. People report the IPs to this database, and a lot of times if it's a malicious IP, it'll come up as being reported in there as brute force, and it also gives you a nice kind of who owns the IP. It's all kind of all in one there. That was really handy when we did a self-denial of service, because somebody in DevOps, before I joined the company, set up a Phantom.js service that went out to a bunch of our properties to verify that everything was working. And then we shut down those separate properties and redirected them all to our main website. And so the Phantom.js service was going to all the redirect sites and hitting our site, like about 10% of our traffic was from. And I put the IP address in and it says, ISO.com, we own ISO.com. Why the hell are they hitting our site? So anyway, one of the easiest way to get layered defense and cheap. So, if you own GoDaddy, if you own your own site, you're not a big shop. CloudFlare has a free plan. They have a $20 a version, $20 a month plan. And to be honest, SolarWinds is a pretty good company. I kind of feel guilty about this, but we use the $20 a month plan, and it's perfectly fine for us in there. But basically, once you set it up, you get free SSL, so you don't have to buy SSL certificates. They do a CDN for you, so you don't have to go and pay for a CDN. They have world-class protection against the common hacks. They basically have a web firewall and other engines set up. SSL security, some of the more common SSL hacks that are hard to break, they've actually modified their code to say, like, well, if somebody's requesting this encryption, only allow this many bytes instead of letting it do buffer overflow type stuff. They handle all that stuff in there. And then page rules are kind of basically one level out where you can do htaccess type stuff, but do it through a GUI interface. Now, a couple of downsides are, in order to do it, you've got to let them manage your domain. So, that may be an issue or a fight that you have to do with your internal IT department in a mid-size or bigger shop. But if you own the domain and it's from GoDaddy or some other hosting service, it should be fairly easy to translate that over to CloudFlare. The other issue is that because it is a CDN, there's another layer of cache. So generally we don't do it for HTML just because it causes so many kind of strange issues, but we always grow anytime they change one of our downloadable PDF files, because then we keep them the same names. Don't go into the why it shouldn't be that way, but but we keep them the same names, and that means basically we have to remember to go to Cloudflare and clear the cache for that PDF, because Cloudflare is caching it for us. So, but little pain for a lot of gain. And basically they have a nice little thing that's called help, I'm under attack. And the reason we could survive a month-long denial of service attack is because I turned that on, and immediately none of the IPs that were hitting our site got through. Basically what it does, it goes to a heavier duty JavaScript typing back and forth human testing thing. The downside is more people would get like the, are you a human CAPTCHA thing? But either increasing that or having the site down because of denial of service, that was a minor thing to and quickly, some traditional alternatives. If you don't want to go Cloudflare, you can't go Cloudflare. I've used AWS CloudFront. That's a good one. It's fairly cost you pay as you go, a lot cheaper generally than Akamai, which is the gold standard, and Verizon HTS is another one I've used. It's fairly reasonable. Setting up a Varnish or Nginx cache front in there. Maybe this is more a DevOps thing, but basically it's a way that you spread the load out. You can say here's an additional gateway they have to go through. htaccess rules, something probably most people can do, is you can use it to deny unwanted crawlers, do a whole bunch of different stuff in there. Block, if a lot of people are trying to go to the WordPress or the autodiscovery.xml, you can block it at the web server. So it never gets to Drupal, it never uses those resources in there. In Drupal, some quick things you can do here is make sure your cache is configured properly. Less resources for multiple hits. Use fast 404. You still have to deal with stuff with code, but it's less impactful on the system. I just threw this in there, some sample access rules that were in my htaccess. The ones on the left are basically going through the logs, once again, going through the logs to see what's going on. I noticed a lot of different bots, crawling bots that, not Google, not the search bots. And I said, I don't want to deal with these people wasting my resources. So, those rules right there, block them at the web server. They never get to Drupal. The other thing is basically, the top part of it is, blocking the auto-discover XML and the WordPerfect login PHP there, which are a couple of common nuisance things. The middle one is actually another self-denial of service event was sometime in the past somebody had set up PayPal. When we did events, we collected stuff through PayPal, and they had used the PayPal API to come back to an old service with /events and record it back there. Well, we had since moved on to a different service, but nobody changed the PayPal. But we also use PayPal as a payment option for all of our services. So every time the first of the month came around, this PayPal service was always coming out and hitting our events page, which unfortunately was like because it's got speakers and photos, and that is one of the most expensive pages to do that, which wouldn't have been bad if they were going to cache. They were doing a post call to that. So post calls basically cut through all of your caching and go straight to the server in there. So quick solution for that was to, if it's a post method going to the events, don't pass it on in there. You can actually expand that post logic a lot to kind of protect yourself from posts. Just we had some other people that were doing posts to our index, to our main home page. And it's like, there's no form on that. They shouldn't be doing posts to that. So that's the other rule in there, is to not deny that. So just some examples of how powerful htaccess can be. So SSL, people think SSL is this magic thing that's just totally secure. It's not. You really need to test your SSL setup on the server. A great way to do that is through the SSL Labs SSL test site there. And I'm proud to say we have an A+, which is higher than Google. So the other thing is, you know, if you're not using CloudFlare, you know, you really need to go to SSL, and there's a nice thing called Let's Encrypt that you can get free SSL certificates. So you don't necessarily, it depends on your hosting provider, but if you do control your own servers, it's a great way to get free SSL and not have to pay a bunch of money there. The other thing is in order, you know, if you do get something besides an A+ in there, you know, there is the SSL server configuration tool. It's kind of nice. So if you have control of your Nginx or Apache server, that will give you like the right or the current best practices for like the list, how you list your encryption keys and a bunch of the other stuff there. So, secure HTTP headers. I'm not very strong on these, and I will say all I will say is that do your research on these. Some of them can break things on your site if you don't test them fully. But if you get them set up correctly, they can be very useful there. Most of these you can set through the security kit module. So this is the case of site builders. You can decide whether or not to use those in there. There is a site to test for your security headers with the securityheader.com. in there. I don't necessarily agree with all the results, but I thought I'd throw it out there. So code attacks. Main points here are to, you know, get your security updates, obvious stuff. Get your security updates. Have a plan that basically commits to updating things if they're critical, knowing if things are critical or non-critical. You know, we usually define critical, of course, is if it's an immediate danger. Non-critical is we've read through the release notes, and there's some mitigating circumstances. A lot of times the mitigating circumstances are you have to be an admin in order to set up the cross-site scripting type things. Those we kind of put into, okay, we're going to do it within a couple of days, but we won't drop everything and do it Wednesday afternoon. You know, so that's what the commit. You know, schedule your reviews of the update report in there. You know, and I've been burned too many times on this to say just automatically update modules. On Drupal 8, it's a lot safer to update like the major modules every time a release comes out. But there have been times, not in Drupal 8, but in Drupal 7, where somebody's gone from like 1.4 to 1.5. And you didn't realize there was a new maintainer. They redid the entire API, and the bad thing was it didn't show up in just the quick surface tests. It was one of those insidious things that the database kind of got corrupted over time because we were using some add-on modules that were depending on the old API stuff. So, you know, it's always worth it to go through the release notes and at least try to see if there's anything dangerous in there. The other thing to say here is if you're using dev modules, which unfortunately that has to happen occasionally with Drupal 8 still, dev modules do not show up in your update report. Keep a list of those, go back out and check whether or not whatever you needed the dev version for hasn't been rolled in for a new release or not, and then once they've done that, do that. Or ideally what we try to do in general is not necessarily use the dev module, but use the last release and apply patches in there. So, and you know, the other thing is keep the rest of the stack updated here. So I'm running a little behind, so I will just say, you know, common stuff. You guys can go back and these slides will be available on SlideShare, so you can read through these and get some stuff there. Same thing, keep the stack up to date, keep the stacks up to date. You know, and take away at the bottom there is, you know, if you control it, try to keep it updated. If you don't control it, at least have a conversation with whoever controls it about keeping things updated. You know, whether that's your service, your hosting provider or not. So user attacks. The number one way you can help yourself against people getting passwords or guessing passwords or brute forcing yourself in there is to use two-factor authentication. It's actually become stable in Drupal 8 now. It's been stable in Drupal 7 for a long time in there. There are ways to protect your site login capabilities. And I say login in general, but it depends on your situation. You can say, oh, well, I'll talk about that later. I've got another slide on that. But you know, implement good user management practices in there. Enforce strong password practices. So, you know, because I think two-factor authentication is very important, I figured I would, for Drupal 8 at least, kind of, the install for that is a little bit confusing. You have to read it about 3 times and then say, oh, I get it. This is my quick version of it, and which is, you know, install these sets of modules in here, which are not necessary. They're mentioned in the README, but they're not really part of the dependencies, like for the TFA module. But basically, you go and you say, I've got to create a random 256-bit random key that I'm going to use for my authentication there. That's one way of doing it. There's a lot of different ways to do that. Then basically you use a key module to add it to your site. Make sure that that's stored somewhere outside of the web root, or if you have to put it into the web root, at least put it under private files. So, you know, then you basically, next level up is you have to use the encryption module to create a profile using that key in there. One of the things I discovered by accident was make sure you read the instructions out when you create the key to have it. I think the type is encryption. Key type is encryption because I chose the wrong type to begin with, and that was a few minutes of head scratching as to why doesn't my key show up in the encryption in there. You know, then basically get TFA set up. Once you've got that up, you basically configure TFA to use that encryption key, and you can set a bunch of stuff up there. From a user perspective, you know, it's fairly simple. You need either Google Authenticator or Authy is another one that uses that. The Google Authenticator module, that's the only one that's available right now for Drupal 8, doesn't use messaging, so you don't have to worry about paying for messaging. It's all time-based codes in there. So you know, basically the people log into the site, they go to the user profile, there's a new security tab. The first time you go there, it'll say, do you want to set up two-factor authentication? There'll be a little barcode displayed, and you take your Authy app, your Authy or Google Authenticator, and use that to set it up on that. And then once you do that, when you next time you log in, you'll be prompted for the code from your phone. So that's the two-factor authentication. It also supplies codes that you can use if you don't have your phone. With Authy, you can actually use multiple authentication methods. I think they have one that you can put on your computer. And the other thing that's nice is it does allow you to do a checkbox, say, remember this browser for 30 days. So you don't have to use it all the time. Basically, once you've authenticated your browser, you will just be able to log in with your user ID and password. But like I say, it's, you know, you can give somebody your user ID and password and they can't get to your account without your phone. So that's why it's one of the best way against user attacks there. So protected logins. There are various ways. It depends on your situation. In our situation, we're pretty much a read-only site. We do collect information, but we do it through Marketo. So basically, we don't have to worry about users logging into our site and stuff like that. So I had it set up where you can use firewall, hosting IP, htaccess, or I think there's a couple of modules that will let you say, I only want people to log into my site from this IP or through this host name or through a different way in there. You can actually use htaccess to allow normal user login from the internet, but then block all admin, like block all the /admin URLs. So that's a kind of a variation of this user protection stuff. So, little disclaimer: the project down at the bottom, the require login by sites is my module that I wrote that goes with require login. But this is basically what we ended up doing, because we had a lot of remote people that needed access because it's Acquia, it wasn't behind our firewall. So basically it set up, the quick description is, we have like an edit.solarwinds.nsp.com, that's not the URL, and we have the normal one. If you come through www and you try to do /user, you get a 404. If you try to do /admin, something or other, you get a 404. If you come in through the other host name, you can log in. Not only that, but if you come through the other host name, the require login by sites requires you to log in before you can see anything. So a couple of security advantages to that is if there is a code problem, like some contrib module has an admin URL that's not quite secure, they can't go through www to get anything /admin, so they're not going to be able to get to that security breach before we get there. If they try to come in through the back to the edit URL, they'll have to log in before that URL will be honored. So, it's kind of a nice way to give yourself some extra protection there. So, and if you go, like I say, if you go to the module there, you'll, I've got some more details on how to set that up. So, login management, I'm going to give a shout out to the Garter distribution. That's basically my go-to when I need to figure out how to do something security-wise. Ideally you should start with the Garter distribution, but of course most people already have existing sites, and that's not an option in there. So quickly run through kind of the things you should think about are monitoring login access. There's a login report module that creates a separate log. You can go in there and you can see who's logging in from where. Very useful for kind of saying, this looks like an odd IP type of thing. And I should say, the rules that I'm doing here are kind of came down to us through our GDPR security audit, but they're basically best practices for security. Here, block account access after 5 attempts. Login security module does that. This one, people say, why should I do that? Login should have an authorized only notification, which we did. We used Bootstrap, so we just did a Bootstrap module, or Bootstrap modal that comes up on the login page. The reason you do it is that there's actually a case where I think it was somebody from England broke into some Pentagon PCs that really didn't have any secure data on them, were outside. They actually had RDP, remote desktop protocol, enabled, and the guy argued that he should not be sent to America for trial because, and according to England law, you have to have an authorized access. If you walk through a door and it doesn't say authorized access, you are not trespassing. They can't arrest you for getting in there. So that's why you see a lot of companies even when you log into their computers, you see that little disclaimer there because of that case. So that's basically something to keep the lawyers happy so they can sue somebody or take people to court if
a lot of hackers live by the code that if there's a lock, you don't enter. But if there is no lock or message.
Yeah, and that was the guy's basic case was that, hey, I think he even used like some of the default passwords to get in there. And it's like, if you guys wanted to be secure, why didn't you block RDP? Why didn't you change the passwords? And the English court agreed with him and wouldn't let him to be extradited to the U.S. So anyway, limit the number of concurrent sessions that way. And the session limit there is actually not by browser. It's basically by different browsers. So you can have multiple tabs open, but that's just a way of keeping, hey, if I'm only limited to 2 sessions and I've got 2 sessions up and somebody gives me a warning that somebody else is logged on, that's a problem, and let you know. I forget which one it is. I think it's the login security also gives you the little messages when you log in that says, you know, you last logged in at this time, your last activity was this time. So it's kind of another check that users might see something unexpected here. Automatically log users out of period of activity. This one's kind of controversial because the GDPR guy said 15 minutes. They were assuming you had something like a Windows PC that can track mouse movements and stuff like that. We had to jump up and down and cry to get that up to an hour, because in the web you could be filling out a form for an hour and suddenly you get logged out. You were doing things, but the web server didn't know it. So, but still, that's a good practice to, you know, if somebody steals your PC. What's that?
So now it is 1 hour.
Well, you can set, basically that module lets you set it to whatever you want. You know, so you could set it to 8 hours or whatever. You know, it's the other thing that's about that, if somebody steals a device that may or may not be locked, at least you know that, you know, after so many hours, they're going to get logged out. Of course, you should be doing other things if you've been stole, but so anyway, strong passwords. You know, common things there. This is the policy rules that we were passed down, which are pretty common in there. But all of this is handled by the password policy module. And unfortunately, either there's a patch to use or use the dev version, because if you use the current version, basically it'll ask you to change your password just about every time you log in.
I have a question about that.
Mm-hmm.
Does it actually make it stronger? Because what I have experienced with this kind of passwords is that it just logs me out of my account. It doesn't really make such a big difference. If I have my favorite song and I put 25 characters in it, I mean, from a brute force point of view, from an attack point of view, it is just as strong as having.
Well, and especially, I would also say, you know, if you're using 2-factor authentication, that might be also another reason to slack off on your password policy, because, you know, if they guess your password, they still can't get in without your phone. So, once again, I'd say this was, if you're having to deal with GDPR and legal department, you know, or have a strong security department in your company, these are the sort of things that they're going to look for here. And this is, so, you know, take it or leave it. I kind of agree with you that making people change their passwords and stuff like that kind of almost says, well, I'm going to have so many passwords, I'm going to stick them.
Yeah, exactly.
Or there's the possibility if everybody, you know, you use LastPass and somebody breaks into your LastPass and suddenly they have all your passwords, you know. So
it's not even that. The fact that it has to have uppercase letters and lowercase letters and numbers and all this. I mean, in the end, I sort of remember what I put as a password. I might have put, I'm the felon, I'm happy, but which ones were capital? Which ones did it turn into numbers? Where is the exclamation mark?
I mean, a common solution to that a lot of people I know use is to say, okay, I have this base password that has all this stuff.
And I update the last character from A to Z.
Yeah, or you have in my
previous password was strong password Q. My next password is strong password R.
Yeah.
Means if they find one of these passwords, they have 24 attempts.
Well, yeah, or I tend to do the same thing, but then I will put something. I have a methodology that I do based on the site, so it's not just a single letter. It's something related to the site that I can remember.
You know, there's some sort of a study, I don't know, in the last year that was saying that the 90-day password change was actually generating more problems because your average user forgets what it is and you have to do some password resetting and it's not worth it.
Yeah, I imagine that there are lots of things like that, but I'm just a messenger.
And then I wonder how many hackers are out there looking for traffic and password changes.
Yeah.
Like, I go to Yahoo and I forget my email password, so it sends me a code. Who's looking for that traffic?
Yeah, I haven't seen it so much on Drupal, but I know my personal website or personal server at the SSH and in the email, I run my own email server. You know, I've put fail to ban in there because I'm getting all sorts of people trying to break in. You know, an open email server is worth a lot of money, so you know, basically 3 times and your IP is blocked with fail to ban. So you know, there are people that are doing that. I'm not so sure it's true in the Drupal world in there. But anyway, we're getting close to time, so I need to kind of oops, internal. Yeah, this is kind of a light slide here. Obvious stuff is limit permissions. You know, don't give content, don't just say, I'll give everybody admin rights in there. If somebody's just doing blogs for you, there's no reason they should have to be able to change any computer settings. Peer review. You know, if you're having custom modules done, or even on content, you know, anything that might have code embedded on the content, having somebody else look at it is a way to keep somebody who says, oh, I just got this temp job so that I can put my site cross-scripting code onto the thing. I mean, you laugh, but that's how Target got hacked, was somebody took a temp accounting job.
Really?
Yes. And got, you know, basically worked long enough to get access to their credit card database and downloaded everything and worked a couple more months and left and sold all the credit card information. So that's why internal attacks can be important, especially in a larger organization. You know, a lot of times you have people that, you know, get access to the site, and then, you know, like contractors and stuff. If you use something like user expire, you know, if they haven't been logged on for 30 days, then chances are they really don't need to be on the site. That blocks the account. So, you know, the common headache with that is when the boss basically logs on after 6 months, you have to unblock them. But
or when somebody goes on vacation.
yeah. Oh, well, I don't know. I mean, this is based on the states. The states don't go out 30 years. I know, you guys take off to August. So, and then once again, that's just, you can change it to 90 days. That's just what our standard was. You know, the other one is don't use shared accounts when you can. You know, it's very hard when somebody leaves the company to go through and change the passwords and redistribute the passwords. That opens up people getting access to the passwords. The harder thing is like protect your data. If you're doing like views with CSV download or something like that, you know, be very, very careful of those permissions in there. Decide whether you really need those kind of modules always enabled in there. And of course, monitor your logs for unusual activity in there. So I mentioned in the syllabus that I talk about security plans. You know, basically, you know, security is not a lot of this stuff is set it up, but you know, overall, it's not a set it up and forget about it process in there. So, you know, you really need to, some of the basic rules of setting up a good security plan are, you know, who's responsible for the web server, who's responsible for keeping the Drupal modules updated, who's responsible for reviewing the logs in there. Make sure that those are part of that person's goal, or they're signed up for that. You know, define an audit plan. Okay, you're responsible for this. That means you've got to check every Wednesday. Every Wednesday, you need to be checking the emails that are coming out of Drupal security. You know, and reviewing those, and then, you know, the follow-up is the response plan. Okay, well, in our company, I'm responsible for reviewing the Drupal security updates, you know, evaluating whether or not there's any modules that affect us. If it's a critical module, you know, I've committed to getting it on within half a day to all of our servers there. So if it's a non-critical module, basically, you know, something that is mitigated by having to have login or doesn't apply to us, you know, I'll have it on within 3 working days in there. So, and you know, where needed, you know, if some of those areas of responsibility are things that you don't control, say like you're using a hosting company, you know, the best thing to do is really talk to them and say, okay, what is your plan around updating the web server, updating the OS? And then, you know, occasionally calling them up and saying, you know, if you happen to see a new OS patch or a major OS patch was needed, you know, calling them up and asking, have you done this? we're kind of nice. One of the nice things about using Acquia as our hosting provider is we don't have to worry about that. They're always saying, you know, okay, we've noticed that we need to update things. We're going to shut the servers down have a maintenance period. You probably won't lose, you know, they set it up so you don't really lose connectivity, but they keep the app stack highly updated. Same thing for CloudFlare. And I think that was the last slide. 45 minutes. So, a little bit of a fire hose. Questions?
One thing I've done, and this irrelevant, goes back to my divorce in 2005, and I was $20,000 in debt. I quit using my credit card. I pay cash.
Well,
Nobody knows where I've spent what.
so. I will definitely do it. Except now that you have now that you have your smartphone, you know, Google Plus comes back and says, "Well, I noticed you were at this restaurant. Please rate this restaurant."
I have a flip phone.
Oh, okay.
Except if you don't have the location synced.
Yeah.
How many fake
And you
IDs?
don't look into their Wi-Fi. And you don't get tagged by your friends.
Yeah, friends is the word versus
Yeah.
alienate everyone you know.
Okay. Well, no more questions. I'll stop the recording.